member of Growth Coaching International. He's an accredited growth coach and experienced facilitator, committed to supporting and engaging individuals, teams and organisations to reach their potential. Jason's experience encompasses every state and territory in Australia and incorporates leadership, project coordination, team development and coaching for the education sector. More than 15,000 people have benefited from Jason's facilitation and coaching work. Lovely, thank you. Sorry. From classroom teachers to senior system leaders across the country, his enthusiasm and ability is described as inspirational as well as motivational. Jason's recent work has included coordinating the coaching projects for school leaders for the Pascoe Educational Leadership Institute in Victoria, facilitating coach skills training for Queensland Education Leadership Institute, New South Wales DEC, New South Wales Association of Independent Schools and numerous Catholic school dioceses. He's also solutions-focused strategy canvas work for the New South Wales Secondary Principals Council members and regional principal clusters, coaching individuals and principal clusters both in New South Wales and Victoria, developing and delivering strategical professional learning experiences for senior executive, as well as working with Indigenous community groups to support their work within schools. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jason to the stage.
Thank you. I'd like to talk to you today about making conversations count. Michael showed you a slide of a shopping list. Did you pick up the subheading? A list of things you don't. See, for me, it was 8J. They were the class that I thought about half a day before I had them. Most of the week afterwards. And doing what I do now, 8J becomes sort of the archetypal class for these conversations in some ways. Because they're the ones that I walk in to the classroom and I think, who does this or this? He's gone. Or if this happens, I've got to make sure I'm on top of that. And all of a sudden, I realise that I'm walking in to the class with the equivalent of, I don't need toilet paper this week, I don't need toothpaste, we don't need bread, and we don't need milk. The trouble is, I didn't know what we needed. So how do we make the conversations in all of the interactions that we have in school count? Just before Christmas last year, North America, Mum, Dad, 2 kids went to a carols by candlelight. You know, in North America, it's cold, it's winter time. It was indoors and they were LED candles, so we don't have to worry about fire. Everything went really, really well. And the carols by candlelight finished. Mum and Dad left the auditorium with the kids, out into the car park with hundreds of them. They found the car, put the kids in the back, who were quite tired at that stage, got in the car, started it and waited for a break to get out of the car park because of all the cars that were pulling out of the event. Put the radio on so it was whirring in the background. Now eventually they got a space, moved out into the line of traffic and got onto the main road. And the traffic started to flow a little easier. And it started then to sleet. Just as that happened, a Christmas carol came onto the radio. And the kids burst into song. What happens next? In that story, and this is from Professor Brené Brown's research, she spent 6 years collecting people's stories and asking them to finish stories just like that one. 60% of those that she spoke to finished that story with a car crash. 8% of people on top of that were able to weave in something else negative. One guy even wove in a shark attack. In the conversations that we have, and it's interesting from Brené's research, over that 6 years she was able to make it more and more generalisable. 60% to 68% of us seem to want to start with the shopping list of things we don't need. Whether that's with AJ, whether that's with that faculty, or that family, or whatever it might be. All of those interactions, all of those conversations matter. I'll let you read what's up there. There's some research that's recently come out of Sydney University that talks about conversations in the workplace and conversations in organisations, and they're suggesting that one conversation can impact up to 38 others. Which actually means that you have a sphere of influence in the areas that maybe you never thought you could get to. And we know in schools there's a conversation, not just in schools, in organisations, there's a conversational continuum. There's a very directive aspect to the continuum. And you know what? We live in a functional, fast-paced environment in schools. And sometimes we just need to say, I need you to do this, I need you to do it this way, and I need you to do it now. So in no way, shape or form am I saying that you don't spend any time at this end of the continuum. What can happen if we're starting off with a shopping list of what we don't want, and we overlay that into our interactions in this fast-paced, functional environment, is we can tend to live down there a little bit more. I'll give you an example. When I had the courage to actually bring up my concerns about my teaching with AJ, it was in a faculty meeting. And a colleague, when I said, I'm just struggling a bit with AJ. Well, I don't have any problems with AJ. End of the professional conversation. Hope you have many meetings like that. That, I don't think, even gets onto the continuum. That's the equivalent of, the old speak to the hand, because I'm not listening. Then there are conversations, as I asked around about AJ, that were things like, you should try this. One of the key things about making conversations count is we don't should on ourselves or anyone else. Bit too directive. Jim Knight's research backs this up in his instructional coaching book, and he says, if you insist, I resist. Then you hear things like, have you tried? Which is really just another way of saying you should. But it might be a little bit further along the continuum. One of the things that we realise is that if we're coming with a negative shopping list and we're overlaying that into a very functional environment where there are lots of relational interactions happening all the time, that there's a key thing to keep in mind, and I'll let you read this. It might not be that useful if people are struggling in some way, shape or form to try and fix it. And as educators, we've been described as well-intentioned fixers. That's why there were smiley faces on the suggestions on the continuum, because it's not with bad intent that we sit down this end of the conversational continuum. There's something else that's really interesting. In 2010, there was a report done by the McKinsey Group which looked at high-performing schools and school systems. And they found that most of the conversations in high-performing schools and school systems sat at this end of the continuum, the non-directive. If you overlay some other research around high-performing teams by Marcel Lysander and Barbara Fredrickson. Barbara Fredrickson is renowned in positive psychology. What they looked at was low-performing and high-performing teams. Two key things. In high-performing teams, the ratio of positive strengths-based language compared to negative deficit focus, the shopping list of what we don't want language. Low performing teams, 6 to 1. High performing teams, 6 plus to 1. Now, if 60 to 68% of us are defaulting to what we don't want on the shopping list, there comes a point where we need to be able to catch ourselves in these conversations to do something different. The other thing that Lysander and Fredrickson found was this concept of advocacy versus inquiry. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting like this. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Where someone puts an idea on the table and then someone else goes, that'll never work. And then the next person puts an idea on the table and someone says, we tried that 15 years ago, didn't work then, won't work now. Advocacy. So down this directive end of the continuum, there was this concept of I will advocate for my shopping list. Yet I'm really not sure what I want. I just know that what you said won't work. The other thing that they found that high-performing teams did, and low-performing teams did that at a ratio of 20 to 1. The 1 was inquiry. And the nice thing about this sort of conversational approach is you can be in these meetings and you can put ideas back on the table by inquiring. Got Jamie here. So Jamie, you know that thing that you said a couple of moments ago in the meeting? Can you tell me a little bit more about this bit? And how you see that working? And all of a sudden, as we inquire into someone else's ideas, we find some common ground. We find some things that 3 ideas that have been pushed off the table may have some synergy about it. So, not advocating, but inquiring into ideas was something that made conversations in high-performing school systems and schools different to others. And they also found that it was a coaching style of conversation. People are not motivated by other people's goals, Jim Knight would say. What is it that you want on the shopping list of what you want, rather than the shopping list of what you don't? I'll let you read this. Schools are something we call complex relational environments, which means you can nudge them here and expect something to happen over here, and it doesn't, it happens there. And then the very next moment, you can nudge it in exactly the same way, and you're expecting it to happen there, and it happens there. If one conversation can impact up to 38 others, the way that conversation reverberates through the relational system, it can be fascinating. Make sure your conversations count. It takes a shift in our thinking to flip from this directive and often problem-focused conversation into a conversation that's more solution-focused. What number's on here? Number 9. This is a chance to take some notes. If you've got a piece of paper and a pen, please write the number 9 in Roman numerals down on your page. Some of you may have seen this. Please don't tell the person next to you what I'm about to do next. You've got the number 9 down on your page. Now, with one stroke of the pen, which means you're allowed to put your pen on the paper only once. Once you take it off, that's the end of the activity. You have 5 seconds to turn the Roman numerals number 9 into the number 6. Ready? Go. Who thinks they got it? Who did that? Aha! Shifting the way we think about the conversations that we want to have and how we have them is an important way of making our conversations in the relational environment of school count. Let me put it to you a little differently. Is the world of work like this, static, predictable, a bit like a machine? Or is it more like this? The guy in the kayak, who every time he's putting his paddle in the water, the river has already changed. It's probably more like this picture, would you say? That's an example of the complex relational system that is school. Because change is happening all the time. And this solution-focused approach to our conversations is about finding the most useful change and amplifying it. And Michael's examples were all part of how to find the most useful change and amplify it. We'll hear more from me in just a little while. Let's have a look at how these logics tend to work out. So if I'm teaching 8J and things aren't going as well as I'd hoped, you can hear a stuckness in my language because I started to call 8J difficult. Someone would say, how are 8J? 8J are difficult. Do you hear I've made them difficult? I wasn't saying 8J were difficult last lesson. I wasn't saying 8J have been difficult this week. I wasn't even saying 8J have been difficult this term. All of a sudden, 8J are now difficult. And what do I tend to do when I'm stuck and I'm taking a linear focus to things? I need to know, when did the problem start? How long has it been going on for? Maybe who's involved in the problem. That'll give me someone to blame. And the assumption is, unless I do something, everything will stay the same. And we're not saying do nothing. This is a different logic. It's not a continuum anymore. It's just a different way of looking at 8J. Describe what's wanted instead. So all of a sudden our shopping list, and people can tell you their shopping list of what they don't want in great detail. But how do we get the detail of the shopping list of what's wanted instead? Because my colleagues would come to me sometimes and say, so what would you like it to be like with 8J? And I'd say, I want 8J to be more engaged. And they go, good idea. End of conversation. Because I could use the abstract jargon of education to have a conversation that still wasn't helpful. So what's wanted in detail? What's the shopping list you want to go into 8J actually? What's working already? What have you got in your favour? The resources, the strengths, the skills, qualities and strategies that will help you teach 8J better. And let's do it in that complex relational environment where, you know what, I'm going to go in and try one or two things differently, a small step, and see what happens so that we can continue to build on what works. So the difference is, rather than trying to find the problem and diagnose it and fix it, there's a different type of language, future-focused, leveraging strengths, creating movement. You're going to use tools in the workshops today that focus on all three of those things. You get to use those conversational strategies for something that you personally want to work on. Maybe it's your 8J. Maybe it's a parental interaction. David Cooper describes it well. If we can catch ourselves from defaulting to the negative and directive, and we can apply some of the conversational strategies and tools that we're going to learn, people will live in those worlds. I'll let you experience it in the workshops rather than describe it in any more detail. Well, this is what it tends to look like. And in my bio, I'm not sure who that person was that's done all that. I'm just a dad of 4 kids, and I do what I do. And they still don't understand what I do, and sometimes I don't. But it was mentioned, the Secondary Principals Council. This is the kind of logic that we've started to use with their strategy planning days with some of the local groups. So often we're in the present. Right now we've got a problem, we've got a challenge, we've got an issue. And we start to think about, well, so when did it start? And we've got this problem-focused view of the past. And we go back looking for when it started. Because we don't want to head into the dreaded future. Because if we keep going this way, it's not going to finish well, is what we tend to tell ourselves. So therefore, let's find out what's broken and we might be able to fix it. And then we can plan. And we can plan not to go to the place that we don't want to go. Now, when you put it up there and you say it like that, it doesn't quite make sense. But most planning, not all planning, is done from some sort of problem focus. Instead, wouldn't it be interesting to think about what would be happening instead of the problem? And get some real detail into that picture. And take a different view of the past. Which is, so when has it sparkled even just a little bit like what we've described up in the cloud? Because you know what? It's very hard to picture or describe a preferred future that's not based on something we've experienced or known. Strangely enough, when we do that really well, we start to notice, or we can notice the past in different ways. Now, I don't know how many of you have done this, it's happened to me a few times, but I've written a management plan, and 3 years down the track, I've looked back and gone, gee, I wish I knew then what I know now. And there are certain things you meet and there are certain things you don't meet. What the solution-focused approach does in the incremental movement towards the preferred future, it allows you to be quite agile in your planning. It gives you a chance to take some small steps and test it in a complex relational environment and shift direction if you need to. Funnily enough, you might not end up exactly there, but you will probably end up in a place that's just where you need to be. So the tools that you'll look at in the groups today are the future focus, past or resources in the past and the present, the things that are working for you already. And then a tool called scaling that will help you define where you are and take those incremental steps forward. One of the philosophers that has been linked closely with this solution-focused approach, not that the founders and the philosopher ever met, but the thinking was similar. The solution does not care where the problem came from. You don't need, on the previous slide, all that stuff in the red to create the stuff in the yellow and the green. Once you've got the shopping list of what you want, you can go in to the supermarket and come out with exactly what you need. Now, my encouragement to you is this. There are 4 areas that we're discovering in the research where schools are using this coaching type approach. It's with students around their achievement and their well-being. Is that where you'll focus your plan? It's around teaching, whether that's classroom observation, whether that's supporting one another, whether that's growing your career path. Is that where you're going to focus? It's around leadership, aspiring leaders and current leaders, supporting one another and being supported. And it's around community. Because you know, when parents come to us to talk about their kid, they have their best kid in mind. Now, I might never see that best kid, but I still need to have that conversation and make it count. So I'll leave you with this quote.